The galaxy had known peace for centuries under the rule of the Celestial Dominion. Planets and entire systems fell under their banner, not always willingly, but inevitably. Their fleets, unparalleled in size and firepower, patrolled the stars like gods watching over their domain. No force could stand against them. Not the rebellious warlords who sought independence. Not the technologically advanced enclaves that dared to challenge their supremacy. Not even the remnants of long-fallen empires that whispered of ancient weapons. The Dominion was eternal. Or so they thought. The first reports came from the outer colonies. Unsettling messages intercepted from long-range probes. Fleets had gone silent. Planets, thriving with industry and life, simply ceased responding. At first, the Dominion's High Council dismissed the reports as malfunctions or isolated pirate raids. But then, the disappearances grew more frequent, swallowing system after system in an ever-tightening grip. By the time the Dominion acknowledged the threat, entire sectors had vanished. Grand Admiral Kael Varos stood in the Dominion's high command chamber, reviewing the reports with grim determination. Holographic projections floated before him, depicting once thriving worlds now marked as dead. His face, hardened from decades of war, betrayed no emotion, but his hands clenched behind his back. "This is not an invasion," said Minister Sorrel, the head of intelligence, his voice thin with fear. "It is an extinction event." Varos turned to him, his silvered uniform catching the cold glow of the holoscreen. "Explain." Sorrel hesitated. "Our long-range probes have picked up something we cannot define. These worlds are not simply being conquered. They're being consumed." Silence filled the chamber. The assembled Dominion officials, some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, had never known fear like this. War, they understood. Conquest was a familiar song. But this was different. Varos studied the swirling projections. "Show me." Sorrel hesitated again before waving his hand over the control panel. The image shifted, revealing grainy, last transmission footage from the frontier world of Ilkaris. The planet's skies were filled with writhing black masses, immense and shapeless, descending from the void. As they moved, the stars themselves seemed to flicker and die. The surface of the planet cracked, cities vanishing as if swallowed by a great abyss. The screams of billions echoed through the transmission before it abruptly cut to static. No explosions, no resistance, just silence. A cold weight settled in Varos' chest. "By the void," he whispered. "The Devourers," Sorrel said, voice barely audible. "That is what the last survivors called them before they were lost." One of the ministers scoffed, but it was a hollow sound. "A myth. We have no records of such a species." Varos exhaled sharply. "And yet they are here." He turned to the assembly, his voice steel. "We must act. Deploy the first and third fleets to the remaining frontier systems. We establish a defensive line before this plague reaches the core worlds." The High Chancellor, an aging but still imposing figure, stood from his throne at the head of the chamber. His golden robes gleamed in the dim light, a stark contrast to the growing dread in the room. "Admiral Varos," he intoned, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I trust in your command. Bring the full force of the Dominion upon these creatures." Varos saluted sharply. "It will be done." The fleet moved swiftly. Within days, the might of the Celestial Dominion surged toward the outer systems. Hundreds of warships, their hulls adorned with the insignia of the Empire, cut through space like daggers. They were the apex of Dominion power, battlecruisers that could reduce planets to rubble, dreadnoughts that had never known defeat, squadrons of fighters piloted by the most elite warriors the galaxy had ever seen. They were the greatest armada ever assembled. They were not prepared. The first engagement took place over the world of Epsilon 9, a heavily fortified colony. The Dominion fleet arrived in formation, weapons primed, defenses at full strength. The Devourers came like a storm. What little sensor data remained from the battle was incomprehensible. Dominion weapons, plasma cannons capable of shattering moons, antimatter warheads that could level continents, had no effect. The Devourers moved through the void, shifting and reforming, their bodies more like living shadows than solid matter. They overwhelmed the Dominion's front lines within minutes. The last transmission from the fleet was a single, chilling message. They are inside the ships. Epsilon 9 fell. The same pattern repeated in every engagement. The Dominion would send their best, and the Devourers would consume them. No ship that entered battle returned. No survivors emerged to tell the tale. Within a month, the Dominion had lost entire sectors. Within 2, the Empire was on the brink of collapse. Panic spread across the core worlds. For the first time in recorded history, the High Council openly debated the possibility of retreat. The Dominion had never known defeat, had never considered the idea of surrender. Now, the very foundation of their power was crumbling. Varos stood in the war chamber once more, facing a council no longer filled with confidence but with desperation. The Dominion's fleets had been reduced to scattered remnants. The Devourers were relentless, moving ever closer to the heart of the Empire. "We must find another way," the High Chancellor said, his voice lacking its former authority. A grim silence followed. No one had an answer. Then, for the first time in history, the Dominion turned to an unlikely ally. A species they had long dismissed. A species they had barely regarded as significant. Humanity. They were not the strongest. They were not the smartest. They were not the most advanced. But the Dominion had seen something in them, something no other species had ever demonstrated. In the face of certain doom, humanity did not surrender. They did not break. They united. And that, the Dominion realized, might be the only hope left. The Celestial Dominion had ruled for thousands of years, its strength unparalleled. But now, at the edge of extinction, its leaders gathered in desperation. Grand Admiral Kael Varos stood before the Dominion High Council once more, his uniform pristine, but his eyes carrying the weight of failure. The chamber, once a place of absolute command, now felt hollow. Ministers who had once spoken with unwavering confidence now whispered among themselves, their voices tinged with fear. 112 systems lost. Varos stated, his tone flat, controlled. 74 of them were not just conquered, but consumed. Nothing remains. The room was silent. He let the weight of his words settle. The leaders of the most powerful empire in the galaxy sat in stunned horror, some gripping the armrests of their seats, others looking away, unable to meet his gaze. "Impossible," High Chancellor Raelin finally muttered. "We are the Dominion. We have crushed every rebellion, every empire that has stood before us." Varos turned to him. "And what did our pride earn us? A destroyed fleet, a broken empire." He stepped forward, placing both hands on the war table, activating a holographic display. Star maps flickered into existence, red swathes marking the void where the Dominion's territories had once thrived. The Devourers' advance was relentless. 15 core worlds remained before they reached Dominion Prime. Varos continued. "We have exhausted our fleets, depleted our reserves. We have weapons, but no strategy. Our conventional tactics have failed. If we continue to fight the way we have, the Dominion will not last another 3 months." Raelin clenched his jaw. "We cannot surrender. There must be a way." "There is," Varos interrupted, "but it is one we have never considered." He waved his hand, and the hologram shifted. It zoomed in on a small, inconsequential section of the galaxy. A single system blinked. A small blue planet, practically a speck in the grand scheme of the Dominion, highlighted itself. "Sol system," Varos announced. "Earth." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The mention of humanity elicited varied reactions: skepticism, amusement, disgust. "The humans?" Minister Sorrel scoffed. "What could they possibly offer? We have barely acknowledged them." "Perhaps that was our mistake," Varos replied. He walked around the war table, staring each council member down. "The Dominion is collapsing. Our fleets have been shattered. Our empire was built on strength, on order. But the Devourers do not abide by our rules. They do not fear us, and they cannot be reasoned with. So tell me, what other option do we have?" Silence. Varos continued, his voice steady but forceful. "Humanity is not the strongest species. They are not the smartest, but there is something unique about them, something we have never fully understood. When faced with annihilation, they do not scatter. They do not surrender. They unite. They evolve. They turn their greatest weaknesses into their greatest strengths. You want us to beg them for help? Another minister spat. They are barely space-faring. Varos shook his head. I do not want us to beg. I want us to acknowledge that they may possess the one thing we do not. The room fell silent again. Raylan looked at the war table, eyes filled with unspoken conflict. Even if we considered this, humanity is divided. They war among themselves more than any other species. What makes you believe they would unite for us? Varos straightened. Because they will not be saving the Dominion. They will be saving themselves. 3 Dominion warships entered the Sol system, slipping out of FDL near Saturn. Earth's primitive long-range scanners detected them almost immediately, but by the time humanity's government scrambled to respond, the Dominion emissary vessel was already in low orbit. The arrival of the Dominion's representatives sent the world into chaos. Every major government was on high alert. Diplomats, military leaders, and scientists convened in secret meetings, debating the meaning of the event. The Dominion had never acknowledged humanity before. Now, without warning, they were here, and they were asking for help. The United Nations Security Council, for the first time in history, convened not to discuss war among themselves, but to deliberate on an alien request for aid. The Dominion emissary, a regal figure draped in flowing silver robes, stood before the gathered human leaders. His expression was unreadable, but his voice carried the unmistakable weight of desperation. The Celestial Dominion is under siege, he declared. A force unlike any we have ever faced is consuming the galaxy. We have exhausted every resource, every strategy. We are losing, and if we fall— He paused, scanning the human faces before him. Humanity will be next. The room was silent. Then, a man at the head of the table, President Elias Carter of the North American Federation, leaned forward, steepling his fingers. So you're telling us, he said, his voice calm but razor-sharp, that the most powerful empire in the galaxy is getting its ass kicked, and now you want us to help you? A ripple of murmurs spread through the human delegates. Some smirked. Others remained tense, their minds already working through the implications. The Dominion emissary remained composed. Yes. Carter exhaled through his nose. And why should we? You've ignored us. Look down on us. Now you come to us because you're desperate. This is not about the Dominion, the emissary said. This is about survival. Yours and ours. A long silence stretched across the room. Then a voice spoke up. A woman, General Ayana Idris of the African Federation, her arms crossed over her chest. You said this enemy is unstoppable. Yes. Then why do you think we stand a chance when you do not? The emissary hesitated for the briefest moment. Because, he finally admitted, you are unpredictable. Your people have survived against impossible odds before. You adapt. You change. You evolve in ways we cannot. The words hung in the air. Then, Carter leaned back in his chair. You're asking the most war-torn, chaotic species in the galaxy to unite against a common enemy. He chuckled darkly. Health of a gamble. The emissary said nothing. And then, for the first time in history, humanity made a decision that would change the course of the galaxy. They said yes. The official declaration of alliance between the Celestial Dominion and humanity sent shockwaves across the world. It was unprecedented, unthinkable. Just a few months ago, Earth had been another insignificant planet in the grander galactic order, barely acknowledged by the Dominion. Now, humanity found itself at the center of an existential war that had already crushed the mightiest empire the galaxy had ever known. For the first time in history, humanity was united. It was not out of benevolence, not out of duty. It was survival. The conference was held aboard the Sovereign, the Dominion's last remaining diplomatic cruiser, now hovering above Earth's atmosphere. Leaders, generals, and scientists from every major human nation boarded shuttles, leaving behind old rivalries to sit at the same table for the first time. The Dominion's high command was also present, pale, Regal figures who once ruled the stars with unchallenged authority, now humbled in the face of annihilation. At the head of the table sat President Elias Carter of the North American Federation, General Ayanna Idris of the African Federation, and Chancellor Mei Ling of the Pan-Asian Union, three of humanity's most powerful figures. Their faces were unreadable, but their eyes were sharp, analytical. Across from them stood Admiral Kael Varos, the Dominion's last great war leader. He carried himself with the rigid pride of a soldier who had never known defeat, until now. Next to him was Minister Sorrel, the head of intelligence, and High Chancellor Raylan, the frail but dignified leader of the Dominion. Carter leaned forward. "You came to us for help. Now tell us everything. No more half-truths. No more withholding information. If we are to stand a chance, we need to know exactly what we're up against." Varos nodded. With a wave of his hand, the holographic projector activated, displaying a massive three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones stretched across the Dominion's former territories, expanding outward like an infection. "This," Varos said, gesturing to the display, "is the current state of the war." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. The sheer scale of the devastation was staggering. Entire sectors, hundreds of planets, had been consumed. Varos continued, his voice cold and precise. "We call them the Devourers. We do not know their origins. We do not know their purpose. All we know is that they do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They do not conquer. They consume." A new projection emerged, a grainy video of a Dominion fleet engaging the enemy. A deep, twisting mass of darkness descended from the void, shifting like liquid, pulsing like something alive. Dominion warships opened fire, massive energy beams slicing through space, plasma torpedoes detonating in rapid succession. The weapons had no effect. The Devourers simply reformed, shifting through the energy blasts as if they were made of mist. Then they struck, their bodies twisted into jagged appendages, lashing out like living blades. The Dominion battleships were sliced apart in seconds. Swarms of smaller creatures emerged, moving like a tide of locusts, invading the remaining ships. The last thing the transmission showed was a single, chilling message from a doomed admiral. "They're inside the hull." The screen cut to static. A heavy silence followed. Chancellor Mei Ling broke it first. "What do we kill them?" Varos exhaled sharply. "We don't. Not yet." Carter narrowed his eyes. "Then how do you expect us to fight something that can't be harmed?" Sorrel cleared his throat, stepping forward. "We have theories," he admitted. "The Devourers are unlike anything we have ever encountered. They're not biological, not entirely. They are partially dimensional, existing between realities. Conventional weapons pass through them as if they are not fully present in our universe." A scientist from the European Union furrowed his brow. "Partially dimensional? Are you saying they aren't entirely in our reality?" "Correct," Sorrel confirmed. "But that also means they have weaknesses. There are rare instances where they can be disrupted. Energy fields, exotic particles, certain frequencies of radiation. But so far, every attempt to harness these countermeasures has failed." Mei Ling tapped her fingers against the table. "You said every attempt failed. That means you've been experimenting. Show us what worked and what didn't." "Let us try." Varos hesitated. This was exactly what the Dominion had feared, sharing their knowledge, revealing their vulnerabilities. But this was no longer a game of power. This was survival. With a curt nod, he ordered his officers to transfer all available data to the human coalition. "You'll have access to everything," he said. "Our technology, our research, our tactics. We have lost too many battles on our own. We cannot afford to lose another." General Idris, who had been silent until now, leaned forward, her dark eyes sharp. "If we do this, we do it on our terms," she said. "Humanity does not take orders. This is an alliance, not a subjugation." Varos met her gaze. "Agreed." For the first time in history, the Celestial Dominion and humanity stood on equal ground. The weeks that followed were the most critical in human history. Every government, every military, every scientific institution on Earth shifted toward a singular goal: survival. The Dominion shared its vast technological archives, and humanity immediately began reverse engineering everything. Dominion battleships were powerful, but they were designed for conquest, not survival. Humanity didn't fight like the Dominion. They fought dirty. They modified ships with asymmetrical tactics, combining Dominion energy weapons with nuclear warheads, electromagnetic pulses, and kinetic impactors. They refitted ground forces, mixing plasma rifles with chemically enhanced projectile weapons designed to disrupt the Devourers' partial dimensional nature. The Dominion strategists were stunned by humanity's approach. The Dominion had always fought with order, with structure. Humanity fought with chaos, with adaptation. They didn't rely on brute strength. They exploited every loophole, weakness, and vulnerability they could find. For the first time, the Devourers would not be facing an empire that fought the way all others had before them. They would be facing humanity. The first real test of the Alliance came when the remnant fleet, what was left of the Dominion's Third Armada, found itself trapped in the Alpha Draconis system. The Devourers had begun their attack, consuming the planets one by one. If the fleet fell, the war would be lost before it even began. Humanity did not hesitate. Within days, Earth's newly formed defense fleet, a hybrid of Dominion warships and human ingenuity, arrived in force. It was time to strike back. The Battle of Alpha Draconis would be the first true test of the Human-Dominion alliance. It was not just a military engagement. It was a declaration that the galaxy would not fall without a fight. Humanity had prepared for war. The Dominion had prepared for war. But no one had ever prepared for this. The remnant fleet, what was left of the Dominion's Third Armada, was stranded in Alpha Draconis, desperately holding the line against the Devourers. Hundreds of warships, once symbols of Dominion supremacy, now fought for their very existence. Their once proud formation reduced to scattered, broken units. The Devourers had encircled them, their abyssal forms shifting and pulsing, stretching tendrils toward the Dominion ships like predators, savoring the inevitable kill. The void itself seemed to bend and distort in their presence, their very existence warping reality around them. It was a slow, methodical slaughter, until humanity arrived. The unified Earth fleet, a hastily assembled but deceptively deadly force, emerged from FDL in an unpredictable, staggered formation. Unlike the rigid Dominion battle groups, the humans did not deploy in clean lines. Their approach was chaotic, seemingly disorganized, until it wasn't. Dominion strategists watching from the command decks were baffled. "What are they doing?" one of the fleet officers asked, bewildered by the non-traditional formations humanity had taken. Varos, standing on the bridge of the Dominion flagship, simply watched. And then, the battle began. The Devourers turned toward the newcomers, shifting their focus away from the dwindling Dominion fleet. It was an opportunistic move, an attempt to strike down fresh prey before returning to finish their feast. The first wave of Devourers surged forward, dark appendages writhing through space. Humanity responded in a way no Dominion commander ever would. They charged, not cautiously, not with careful, measured precision. They rushed headlong into the chaos. The first human warships, retrofit Aegis-class battlecruisers, opened fire, not with Dominion energy weapons, but with something far more primitive and brutal, solid projectiles wrapped in high-energy electromagnetic fields. The Dominion officers watched in stunned disbelief as hyper-accelerated slugs, tungsten rods, and nuclear-tipped missiles slammed into the Devourers like hammers against glass. The result was devastating. For the first time, the Devourers reeled. From the bridge of the Dominion flagship, Varos watched with a mixture of shock and awe. The Dominion had assumed the Devourers were impervious to all conventional weapons. But humans had redefined what conventional meant. They had weaponized unpredictability. Aboard the UN Valkyrie, the command ship of the unified Earth fleet, Admiral Catherine Vega stood at the helm. Her orders were sharp and rapid. All wings, execute Firestorm Maneuver Theta. The Dominion officers barely had time to process what that meant before the battlefield exploded into coordinated chaos. Small human frigates and corvettes weaved through Devourer formations, dropping gravity distortion mines, devices designed to momentarily disrupt the enemy's dimensional phasing. Modified Dominion plasma weapons, now using variable energy frequencies, struck in rapid, randomized sequences, preventing the Devourers from adapting to any single wavelength. Kinetic weapons, long dismissed by the Dominion as primitive, proved alarmingly effective. Mass-accelerated railgun slugs tore through Devourer flesh, leaving behind gaping wounds that took seconds longer to heal than before. Seconds mattered. Humanity exploited every second. The Dominion's officers watched as the humans fought like no species they had ever seen. Not with brute force, but with cunning, with misdirection, with sheer audacity. "They're outthinking the enemy," Minister Sorrell whispered, barely believing what he was seeing. "They're winning," Varos corrected. The battle raged for hours, an impossible struggle against an enemy that should not be defeated. But humanity refused to follow the rules of conventional war. And so, against all logic, the tide turned. The remnant fleet, on the verge of collapse, regrouped under human command. With renewed coordination, the surviving Dominion warships linked their targeting systems with human vessels, synchronizing their firepower in a way the Dominion had never attempted before. Together, they ripped the Devourers apart. Focused barges of hybrid Dominion-human weaponry tore through the Devourers' ranks. Coordinated gravity disruptions prevented the enemy from reforming. Tactical retreats and decoys forced the Devourers to split their forces. And then, at the peak of the battle, Admiral Vega gave the final order. "All ships, unleash Ragnarok." The superweapon, a combination of Dominion antimatter reactors and human ingenuity, detonated at the core of the Devourer formation. A controlled dimensional collapse occurred, and in the heart of that implosion, the Devourers screamed. For the first time in history, the Devourers retreated. The Battle of Alpha Draconis was over. In the aftermath of the battle, the surviving Dominion officers stood in stunned silence. The impossible had happened. The Devourers had been stopped. Not destroyed, not yet. But this was the first time any force had fought them and won. Humanity had not just joined the war. They had become its spearhead. On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Admiral Vega turned to Varos. "We're just getting started," she said. Varos, a man who had once believed in Dominion superiority above all else, simply nodded. Because for the first time in his life, he knew the truth. The Dominion was no longer the most powerful force in the galaxy. Humanity was. The Battle of Alpha Draconis had changed everything. For the first time since the war began, the Devourers had been stopped. Not destroyed, not vanquished, but forced to retreat, a concept that, until now, had been impossible. And it had been humanity, not the celestial Dominion, that had turned the tide. Now, for the first time in history, the galaxy had hope. The war room aboard the Sovereign, the Dominion's last remaining command vessel, was filled with the highest-ranking leaders of both humanity and the Celestial Dominion. The tension in the air was unmistakable. The Dominion, once proud and unchallenged, was now forced to listen. They no longer dictated orders to lesser species. They sat at the same table, equals with the humans they had once ignored. At the head of the room, Admiral Catherine Vega of the Unified Earth Fleet stood beside Grand Admiral Kael Varos, overseeing a massive holographic display of the galaxy. Red zones, indicating the regions consumed by the Devourers, still dominated the map. But now, for the first time, there were new markers, green and blue zones indicating safe sectors, held by the new alliance. "We need to push forward while they're weakened," General Iona Idris said, her sharp gaze scanning the Dominion officers across from her. "Alpha Draconis prove they aren't invincible. We cannot afford to let them regroup. You speak as if they are an enemy that can be defeated," High Chancellor Raylan interjected. His expression was weary, his once pristine robes now stained with the burdens of war. "They're not like us. They do not feel fear, nor do they acknowledge strategy in the way we do. They do not retreat to recover. They retreat to adapt." Vega exhaled. which is exactly why we have to keep them on the defensive. We can't let them evolve past our countermeasures. A holographic representation of a Devourer bioform appeared in the center of the table, flickering as new data continued to be analyzed. We now understand that their dimensional phase shifts can be disrupted using electromagnetic graviton pulses. Dr. Elias Grayson, a leading scientist from Earth's Exotactical Research Division, explained. Alpha Draconis confirmed this. The problem? It's not a permanent weakness. They'll find a way around it. Sorrel, the Dominion's intelligence minister, folded his arms. Then what do you propose? Grayson adjusted the hologram, zooming into the heart of Devourer-occupied space. We take the fight to them, he said simply. The room fell silent. Varos furrowed his brow. A direct offensive? No one has ever infiltrated their occupied territory and returned. Even our greatest fleets fell within minutes. Grayson nodded. Yes, because they fought the way the Dominion always fights. They engaged in direct warfare, head-on battles, large fleets, orderly formations. He turned to Vega. Humans? We don't do that. A grin tugged at Vega's lips. We don't conquer. We sabotage. She brought up another projection, a hit-and-run strategy targeting key Devourer processing nodes deep within enemy-controlled space. We're proposing the first interstellar insurgency against the Devourers. We don't fight to hold ground. We fight to disrupt. We fight to disable. We fight to make them bleed before they can evolve past us. Varos was quiet for a long moment. Then, to the shock of his Dominion peers, he nodded. It's reckless, he admitted, but it may be the only way. The first coordinated strike mission, codenamed Operation Shadowfall, was launched 2 weeks later. A joint human-Dominion task force consisting of stealth-class corvettes, experimental infiltration teams, and hybrid Dominion-human operatives was assembled. Their mission? Penetrate deep into Devourer-controlled space and deploy high-yield, dimensional destabilizers, weapons that could disrupt the Devourer's ability to phase shift. They would not be fighting for territory. They would be sowing chaos behind enemy lines. This was not conventional warfare. This was war the human way. Aboard the UN Phantom, a modified Dominion stealth cruiser, the task force prepared for deployment. The ship was smaller than traditional Dominion vessels, heavily modified with Earth-based stealth technology that even Dominion engineers were struggling to fully comprehend. Final approach to the target world came the voice of Commander Vasquez, the leader of the infiltration team. All units, gear up. Once we land, we've got exactly 6 minutes before the Devourers detect us. The target was Yelvar 3, a former Dominion colony now deep in enemy territory. It had been completely transformed by the Devourers, a once thriving world, now an alien landscape of shifting, organic structures, pulsating with unnatural life. Vega's voice crackled over comms from the fleet's command center. Remember, we don't hold ground. We get in, we disable their energy hubs, and we get out. As the Phantom descended, Vasquez and his team of elite Dominion human operatives leaped from drop pods, plummeting toward the corrupted surface below. They landed in silence, their stealth fields activating instantly, rendering them nearly invisible. The Devourer presence was overwhelming. Massive biomechanical structures pulsed like living monoliths, towering over the ruined cityscape. Stay low, Vasquez whispered. Move fast. The team navigated the alien terrain, avoiding writhing tendrils and organic surveillance nodes. The Devourers were changing, adapting even faster than predicted. And that meant humanity had to be faster. They reached the first power node, an immense, pulsating core of dark energy, tendrils feeding into the very fabric of the planet. Plant the charges, Vasquez ordered. The team moved quickly, attaching experimental graviton disruptors to the core. And then the ground shifted. The Devourers had sensed them. The team had seconds. Detonate now, Vasquez shouted. The graviton charges activated in an instant, sending a shockwave of disruption through the entire node. The Devourers shrieked, a sound that was felt more than heard, vibrating through their very bones. The mission had succeeded, but the escape would be another battle entirely. Across the galaxy, more insurgency cells were forming. More raids were being planned. Humanity had turned the war into something new, something the Devourers had never faced before. They weren't fighting an empire anymore. They were fighting a resistance. They were fighting humanity. And humanity never stops fighting. The resistance war had begun. Humanity, alongside the remnants of the Celestial Dominion, had shifted the battlefield into something entirely new, something the Devourers had never encountered before. The war was no longer fought in grand armadas and open battles. It was fought in the shadows, in hit-and-run raids, in sabotage operations deep behind enemy lines. And it was working. But every war demands a price, and the cost would be unimaginable. By the 6th month of the Resistance War, over 130 deep strike missions had been launched into Devourer-occupied space. Each one targeted critical weak points, power hubs, energy relays, dimensional anchor points, anything that could slow their enemy down. Humanity had become the galaxy's insurgents, striking without warning, using improvised weapons and unconventional tactics to keep the Devourers off balance. But the Devourers were adapting, and they were learning. The missions became harder. The casualty rates climbed. The Dominion, already on the brink of collapse, could not afford further losses, and even humanity's reckless resilience had its limits. Something had to change. The turning point came in the Nova Corinth operation, a mission designed to deal a crippling blow to the Devourers' foothold in the Perseus Arm. Intelligence suggested that Nova Corinth, an abandoned Dominion capital world, had been transformed into a major processing hub for the Devourers. Destroying it could set them back significantly. The unified Earth fleet and Dominion remnants assembled a strike force of 60 warships, accompanied by stealth teams, all equipped with the latest hybrid countermeasures developed in the last 6 months. They had one objective: detonate a chain reaction inside the Devourers' energy core and collapse their entire infrastructure in the system. It was humanity's most ambitious strike yet. It would also be their deadliest mistake. The fleet entered Nova Corinth's orbit, launching tactical infiltration teams toward the surface. Admiral Vega, commanding from the bridge of the Yuyan Valkyrie, coordinated the operation alongside Varos and Dominion strategists. Everything seemed to be going smoothly, until the Devourers revealed the truth. The mission hadn't been a brilliant tactical move. It had been a trap. The intelligence they had intercepted had been planted. The Devourers had let them believe Nova Corinth was a critical location. In reality, it was a feeding ground, and the moment humanity committed its forces, the trap was sprung. The Devourers unleashed a new form of warfare, a horrific biological adaptation. Instead of engaging in space battles, they infected the very fabric of space-time around Nova Corinth. A dimensional rupture formed. The laws of physics collapsed. Entire warships were swallowed whole, their hulls cracking and warping as they were pulled into unnatural black voids. The humans and Dominion forces on the ground watched in horror as their ships vanished, not destroyed, but erased, as if they had never existed. Admiral Vega's voice crackled over the comms. All forces retreat. Get out of there now. But for half the fleet, it was already too late. On the ground, Vasquez and his infiltration team realized there was no escape. Their dropships had been consumed, and the only way out was through a collapsing battlefield filled with Devourer horrors. "Looks like we're walking home," Vasquez muttered, gripping his rifle. The remaining troops fought savagely, pushing through waves of Devourer swarms in a desperate bid for survival. Above them, the remaining fleet forces, led by Vega and Varos, launched a full-scale orbital bombardment, a reckless but necessary move to carve a path out. Explosions rained down like hellfire, entire sections of the alien city world collapsing under the onslaught. Hundreds of human and Dominion soldiers died in the chaos. But some survived. Vasquez's team made it to an extraction zone, their numbers cut in half. The fleet, what remained of it, escaped Nova Corinth, bruised, bloodied, and broken. But they had lost 27 warships. Over 60,000 personnel were gone, and the Devourers had won the engagement. The Nova Corinth disaster shattered the fragile morale of the resistance. The Dominion, already weakened, fractured further. Some of its leaders began to argue that humanity's reckless tactics were doing more harm than good. "We cannot afford more losses," High Chancellor Raylan said, his voice weary. "Our empire is already gone. How much longer can we continue this fight?" Vega shot back. "You think surrender is an option? You saw what they did to our people. Surrender isn't survival, it's extinction." Varos, normally silent, finally spoke. His voice was low, deliberate. "We cannot survive another battle like Nova Corinth," he admitted. "Our fleet is crippled. If the Devourers adapt further, we will be out of options." A silence fell over the war room. It was the harshest truth of all. They had won battles, but they were still losing the war. Humanity, for all its defiance, could not win through attrition. If they wanted to survive, they needed something radical, something unpredictable. Varos turned to Vega. "You humans, you have a saying, don't you? Victory through desperation." She nodded. "We call it a Hail Mary." A long silence stretched between them, and then Varos exhaled sharply. "Then it's time," he said, "for our last gamble." The room fell into absolute silence, because they all knew. The next battle wouldn't be another strike operation. It would be the final stand. Win or lose, the war would be decided in one final battle, and humanity would lead the charge. The galaxy had reached its breaking point. For months, humanity and the remnants of the Celestial Dominion had fought a desperate war, striking deep behind enemy lines, sabotaging the Devourers at every turn. But it wasn't enough. Nova Corinth had proven that the Devourers were adapting. They had learned. And with every battle, humanity's window for survival grew smaller. Now, there was only one option left. A final, all-or-nothing assault. This would be the last stand of the galaxy. The War Council gathered in the command chamber aboard the Uyen Valkyrie, humanity's new flagship. Every major leader, human and Dominion, was present. Admiral Catherine Vega stood at the head of the room, alongside Grand Admiral Kael Varos. Behind them, a holographic projection of the galaxy flickered, displaying the Devourer's main processing core, a massive, planet-sized bioconstruct at the center of their controlled space. "This is our target," Vega said. Chancellor Mei Ling frowned. "What exactly are we looking at?" Sorrel, the Dominion's intelligence minister, stepped forward. "We believe this is their central hive mind, the place where all of their consciousness converges. Every adaptation, every evolutionary step they take originates from here." Varos exhaled sharply. "Destroying it could stop them permanently." Vega nodded. "If we take this out, the Devourers won't be able to coordinate their forces. Without a singular intelligence guiding them, their swarms will collapse into mindless chaos." General Iona, Idris leaned forward. "You're suggesting we attack the heart of their species?" "Yes," Vega said, "and we need to hit them before they evolve past US." A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone understood what this meant. This was not a battle to win the war. It was a battle to determine whether the galaxy survived at all. The last fleet of the galaxy assembled near the edge of Devourer-controlled space. It was a ragtag force, an armada of human warships, Dominion battlecruisers, and salvaged vessels from dozens of fallen worlds, the final survivors of a once mighty civilization. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet they were here, standing against extinction itself. As the fleet moved into position, Vega transmitted a message across all channels. "This is Admiral Vega to all forces. Today, we do not fight for territory. We do not fight for power. We fight for survival. We fight so that tomorrow may still exist." A pause. Then she smiled grimly. "Let's show them why humanity never gives up." And with that, the final battle began. The Uyen Valkyrie led the charge, flanked by Dominion dreadnoughts and repurposed alien carriers. The Devourers reacted instantly. From the dark void of space, a tidal wave of horrors surged forth. Massive biomechanical monstrosities, writhing tendrils stretching across the battlefield. They came in unfathomable numbers, more than any previous engagement. It was the full might of the Devourer species, a force meant to wipe the last survivors of the galaxy from existence. But humanity had one last trick left. As the battle erupted into chaos, a special strike team, composed of human, Dominion, and Rebel forces, descended onto the Devourers' core world in experimental stealth dropships. Leading them was Commander Vasquez and his infiltration team. Their mission? Deploy the Dominion's last superweapon, a dimensional collapse bomb, designed to tear the fabric of space apart, annihilating anything caught in the blast. The team landed deep within the heart of the enemy, moving through twisted, living corridors, dodging sentient defenses as they pushed toward the core. Time was running out. Above them, the battle raged at an apocalyptic scale. The fleet fought desperately, but the Devourers were relentless. One by one, the Dominion ships fell. The human fleet was decimated. The Valkyrie took critical damage, its engines crippled. It was a losing battle, until the message came. This is Vasquez. We're in position. The dimensional collapse bomb had been placed at the heart of the Devourer's central core. But there was a problem. The remote detonation system had failed. Someone would have to stay behind to manually trigger the device. Vasquez knew what had to be done. "This is Vasquez," he said, his voice calm. "Get the team out of here." Vega's voice crackled over comms. "Vasquez, you won't make it out." He smirked. "Yeah, I know." A long pause. Then he pressed the trigger. The dimensional bomb detonated, unleashing a catastrophic implosion. The Devourer's central core, the source of their intelligence, their adaptation, collapsed in on itself. A massive shockwave tore through their fleets, and in an instant, the battlefield changed. The Devourers froze mid-motion, their bodies twitching erratically. The hive mind was gone. Across the battlefield, the Devourers lost coordination, their once perfect formations falling into chaos. And humanity, battered and broken, struck the final blow. The last remnants of the Devourer fleet were wiped from the sky. The war was over. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been unfathomable. The once mighty celestial dominion lay in ruins, reduced to scattered remnants. Humanity had suffered catastrophic losses. Earth itself had been nearly crippled by the war. But they had won, not by being the strongest, not by being the smartest, but by doing what no other species had ever done before, by fighting together. As the survivors gathered on the remaining ships, Vega stood before what remained of the fleet. "This war changed us," she said. "The galaxy will never be the same." She looked out at the surviving Dominion officers, no longer rulers, no longer conquerors, just survivors. "Today, the Dominion does not stand alone," she continued. "Humanity does not stand alone. We're something new now, something that will never be divided again." A pause. Then she smiled. "Because today, we are not just an empire. We are a united galaxy." And with that, the next era of history began. Not as the age of the Dominion, not as the age of humanity, but as the age of unity, the age that saved the stars.